Fellas, how you all doing, man? We are back for another episode of Common Grounds of Self-Determination. We missed last week because folks were ill. It was a lot of I was traveling. It was just a lot of stuff happening, man. But I missed you, brothers, and I'm happy to be back here with y'all, man. Let's just check in. Oh, how you doing, fam?
What's up? What's up, man? Good to see you, Doc. How you feeling, dude?
I'm good, man. It's definitely good to see you. I love the orange background with the it's like, okay, I see you. I have this green screen thing happening right now, but I love this. It's very homemaker of you, brother.
Yeah, man. I've got some arts and crafts set up for later.
You like one of them people that build like the ships in the bottle type stuff. Like that's what that happens in that room. I love it.
I don't even know how that shit works, man.
I think they just build it in there and lift it up. I don't know. David, how you doing, fam?
I'm doing good. Glad to be here. Good to be hanging with the two of you, and the folks that are tuning in. We'll definitely do our best to respond in time to questions that we're getting. We missed last week. There's a lot going on, I think, for all of us, but glad to be here. I'm podcasting right now from an empty home, so I'm relocating my family to an undisclosed California location.
Except for the two trees, it's like you're between two farms.
I know, man. You've like taken that and repurposed it, and I think it looks better.
Finally, an upgrade. I got two plants, and my computer's on a box, and I'm sitting on a camping chair. But you wouldn't know that.
Awesome. Man, I think you do it better than Zach Galifianakis, good brother.
Exactly. So, there you go. That's what I was saying.
We missed each other last week, but we're here. And if you're listening, we need you all to share, like, comment, all that good stuff. If you want to hear more conversations like the ones we're about to have around, Black history, Brown history, what has pushed us apart and what can ultimately bring us together around, self-determination, both together and individually. So, today we're going to do some stuff around just the history, man. And so I'm just really, really excited about this. And the fellas put together just a really dope show. And so, Omar, there was this rebellion that you wanted us to kind of talk about. And I actually have not heard much about this at all. So why don't we start there and then, just explain to the folks out here, like what it is and why it's significant.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, I harp a ton on history. I think, David and I were both history teachers, right? So the history of this rebellion, I think, sets the stage as to what was really going on in the United States. So first, let me just break this down. When we start talking about Black and Mexicans, remember the fact that, first off, Mexicans are in the history of the world, being created. All right. Mexicans is a synonymous term for mezclado, meaning mixed. Mezclado meaning Mexicans are a mix between our indigenous background and our Spanish background. And that was happening in New Spain. This is why you've got places like California, Alto California, Baja California, Colorado, Nevada. There's no coincidence that all these are Spanish names. So we're on this side of the country. Meanwhile, back east, when the 13 original colonies were getting set up post the Revolutionary War, you had something happen called Bacon's Rebellion. And basically, the Revolutionary War of the United States promised all these folks who fought in the war. We all know who fought. It was farmers. It was folks who were not well-to-do. This is your low-income folks because, if you had money, you can buy your way out of the war. What's up, Thomas Jefferson, who bought himself out of the Revolutionary War. A number of founding fathers did the same thing. When the war ended, they made all these promises of equity and land and sharing, which, we've heard that before, and it did not come to fruition. So what wound up happening was that free Blacks in the North and what were essentially very poor farmers, sharecroppers, poor white folks in the North got together and they're like, this is absolute bullshit. We were promised some level of equity. We fought in this war. We died in order to do what exactly? Because they didn't even realize what the Revolutionary War was for. They were sold a bill of goods about freedom and equity and all these other things. And really, it was just a way of like getting rid of the taxes that England was imposing upon them and keeping that money. So they banded together and they said to themselves, we're going to launch a rebellion because the equity promised to us has not really achieved. This is one of the most beautiful moments of black and white coming together and saying, it doesn't matter what color we are, the social circumstances that we're currently living in are identical. And really the culprit, the enemy here is the aristocracy. This is your George Washingtons, your Thomas Jeffersons, your James Madisons, all the founding fathers everyone knows about, loves about, reads about in the books. They really set up a system to ensure, we're at the top and these people are going to stay at the bottom. This rebellion was really about taking that fight to them. Before the rebellion even truly got underway, before violence really ensued, you had the aristocratic members find out about this little rebellion, come to the white people, talk only to the white folks, and basically tell them, listen, I get that you're pissed. I get that you're angry, but I want to reassure you of something here so that you don't make a mistake. You will never have it as bad as black people. Black people will never get equal rights. They will never be treated equally in this country. So you launch a rebellion against us. How are we going to help you? But if you help us, we'll help you. You scratch our back, we'll scratch yours. We'll make sure that, hey, I don't know if you'll ever be at the aristocratic level, although that is truly the American myth and dream that everyone can become rich, right? No matter what circumstances, but we'll take care of you. So in actuality, this entire rebellion that was a congregation of black and white in order to create a more equitable United States was squelched before it even happened, because essentially the aristocratic members came in and brokered a deal with the white folks. And the crux of this deal was essentially hinged on one thing. You'll always have it better than black people because we will always treat you better than the blacks. So don't side with the blacks because it's going to fare horribly for you.
Well, let's stay here for a minute.
Yeah.
Oh, somebody got an echo. Can you still hear me?
Oh yeah, I can hear you.
I feel like there's an echo, but I'll figure that out in a second. But so as we do this episode, right, and we're talking about it, like, listening to that and the folks that kind of got in to disrupt that, what for this podcast, why is that an important grounding moment for what we're talking about here on this podcast?
I mean, I'd suggest, I'm going to throw one more thing in there, not to throw a wrench into the amazing history lesson that we just got in like a 7-minute dialogue. Thank you for that, Omar. I think the other piece that was used to like divide, the different groups that were that formed this rebellion was the fact that to the west, the poor whites that were moving out west. This is like the start of Manifest Destiny, right? And the quote unquote founding and settling of this country. Was the interactions that they were having, the violent interactions they were having with Native Americans, which were obviously upset because their land was being encroached upon and stolen, right? And so this other like third, group of people that was kind of brought into this situation to be used, sort of as another party against these two groups that Omar is talking about. And right. I think for the historical significance around education, like what we're talking about right now, even the current dialogue, right, is like something simple as like Bacon's Rebellion, where there is a moment where there was like both, white and black intersectionality towards trying to upend the powers to be. Like those are the stories that we just don't hear about. You might have read about Bacon's Rebellion. You don't read about it in a critical way from all the different angles that are involved.
Right.
And so there's a cultural aspect there. There's a curricular aspect there. And if you wanted to get down to it, it connects directly with like critical race theory. Like we should be learning about Bacon's Rebellion. Children should be learning about it in middle and high school through a critical, multiracial lens.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, I mean, I appreciate. I love the history story, and I think just for people that's out there listening, right? Like when we set the stage around, okay, well, all right, that's an interesting thing to start with, right? When you're talking about Black people, brown people, and where that piece comes, this is one of those foundational pieces, right? And the way and what I'm taking away from it as somebody listening and learning with the group is that there's always been folks. It reminds me of the book "What's the Matter with Kansas" that I read when I was in college, and basically it was this writer asking the central question: Why do residents in Kansas vote against their best interest? You know what I mean? And it was basically the conclusion is that even if I'm poor and even if I got it terrible and these other people are getting fat off of it, these fat cats or whatever, but I'm at the bottom, at least I'm still not below Black people. At least I'm still not beneath these folks. And I think that when you understand that and you understand the way that these systems kind of work, right, you have to understand things like Bacon's Rebellion, because it's not that everybody wants to be at the top. It's just that nobody wants to be at the bottom. And that has been used to put poor communities against each other. It just reminds me of my time living in Kentucky, where I grew up around a bunch of poor white people. It was like, it's almost like a concentric circle where it's like in the middle were Black people, really poor, and right outside of the Black people were like trailer parks and white folks. And then further out was like the white folks with money or whatnot, right? But that middle ring never like had like an outburst moment, right? Because on some level they felt like they were at least doing better than these folks. So I think it's an interesting story to start with.
And I want to just quickly say, like, the grounding for it, the reason for it isn't just because I think people compare themselves to each other and don't want to be at the bottom. This is proof. This is evidence that there was systemic attempts by the American government, by the aristocracy, to purposely subjugate one group and put one group above the other, which then grounds us into our conversation about how they have done so. The government has actually done purposely jobs of ensuring that Black and brown fight against one another in order to essentially distract away from the kind of shit that they're doing, the nefarious, illegal shit that these, corporate cats and governmental cats are doing. And it's just what it is a story of proof. This happened. This is real. Don't ever forget the fact that there are larger forces at work. And it's not just us fighting against one another. It's like there's proof that we were pit against one another very early on.
Right. And I mean, I think that's a beautiful way to start. And I mean, it's going to lead me into my next question. I get to I feel like I'm more so interviewing you two on this episode, but I think just to bring in another historic moment that will distill, just some of the myths that's out there, right? Like I was just reading something and it was just talking about, Blacks don't care about education and they don't care about like investment and things like that. And then, I always read up on the Tulsa race riots. Well, I don't even know. It shouldn't be called a riot, right? It's actually, the Tulsa massacre, right? Yeah. Where it was these Black folks that kind of went off and just doing their own thing, but they had their own schools. They had like thriving businesses, right? Like people were making like a lot of money, and like with governmental support, like they were bombed, like a domestic bombing had happened, right? So, when you think about
support, governmental straight up,
right? I mean, even if you watch, Judas and the Black Messiah, right? And what happened to Fred Hampton, where like the police like assassinated this dude. And the reason why I only bring up that point as we talk about Bacon's Rebellion is that there have been instances in this country where non-white folks have risen up and kind of built stuff and did what they need to do. But it always does feel like there needs to be this extra piece on the necks of, certain types of minority folks, where it's like, no, we can't, aside from me not wanting you to have more, we can't let other people see you doing well by yourself. Like we need to keep this kind of in check. So for me, since I got two brothers that I really care about and I look up to in different ways. I got a Latino brother that's out of Texas, a Latino brother that's out of California, which has its own differences and pieces in there. What, for somebody who's not a part of that community, can you help me with what's the terms that we should be using, man? Like you know what I'm saying? Like my OG brown homies be like, please don't refer to me as Latinx. Like, and I'd be like, yes, sir. I don't know, bruh. So and I know that I'm not the only person with this question, and I know that this is something that probably rages on in you all's community the same way how I feel about BIPOC, right? There's some black folks that like it. There's a lot of us that are like, just call me black. Black is fine. I understand the grouping. I understand the solidarity piece, but our names keep changing without people asking us. So fellas, help me to not ever make these mistakes again. What is the difference between, these terms?
Wow.
Is that even okay to ask?
Yeah, for sure. That's what we're here for.
Okay.
And I'm here to learn from Omar too. So Omar, let me take a quick 30-second pass at this, and then you can
take a much longer stab at this.
Well, I don't know, man. That's a great question. It's a big question, and it's what people are talking about right now. So I think some of these terms are like geographic in nature. Some of them are like geopolitical, and some of them are like socio-political, right? I think the first one, outside of like people being identified by like their country of origin, was Hispanic, which I believe was coined by the Nixon administration. So there's an immediate check mark. And then any word to describe brown people with the subterm, suffix panic in it's probably not good, right? And so I think that was used as a larger umbrella term to describe people that were coming from Spanish-speaking countries, basically Spain, and all of the other territories and lands and countries that Spain acquired through its imperialist actions, right, and colonialist actions over centuries. Then the smaller term is before Latinx, Latino, Latina, just is obviously gender-oriented ways of describing people that come from Latin American countries. So now we're talking about, everything from Mexico South and then parts of the Caribbean. Super big umbrella, right? Not very helpful. And then Chicano is more of a socio-political term to describe indigenous European people that really believe that their homeland is in a place that's called Aztlan, which is in the American Southwest, and that we are the true ancestors of the Mexica or the Aztec people. So it's a much more political term as opposed to geographic, but it does have some geography oriented to it. Omar.
No, I mean, dude, you wrapped it up real well. I think growing up, it was just confusing, right? I grew up with Hispanic, and it's just something of as David said, it felt like it was we're all from this quote Spanish ancestry. I think people revolted against it because what it did was place a certain emphasis on the Spanish ancestry, that we spoke Spanish. And this is, again, countries existing from Argentina hasta Mexico, and everything in between, sans Brazil, that speaks Portuguese, right? And put this emphasis on the Spanish side, didn't put the emphasis on the indigenous side. So Hispanic got kind of under fire because it's you're on the Spanish side. You're not claiming anything from your indigenous roots. Chicano, you're absolutely right, has a very political term to it. And it was really kind of, I would say, not so much developed, but really fleshed out in the 60s during the civil rights movements, during the United Farm Workers movement. And it was both in homage, like you said, to our indigenous backgrounds, but it has a lot of political connotations. So someone's dude, I'm not Chicano, almost as a way of saying I don't have a fight in this. I'm not in this quote fight for, you know, whatever it may be, you know, equity or, you know, working rights, whatever the fight may be towards greater social equality. I think in recent years, what has happened is that the Latino community, despite the fact that it is in no way, shape, or form a monolith, and we should get into all the ways that, like, dude, we got like, you know, weird beef with one another, which is like, again, odd. Like, you know, the Cubans, the Puerto Ricans, the Dominicans, the Mexicans, you start throwing in, you know, Colombians and Latin Americans in there. That's a totally different deal. But it's this idea of trying to create a united people and then obviously eliminating the gender component of it with the X. And I think the idea behind that is trying to round a way of saying this is who we are, incorporating Latin America without having to necessarily be on one bent or the other. The Hispanic bent that puts a lot of emphasis on Spanish background, or the Chicano bent that has kind of political connotations to it. So, dude, like, people get all worked up about these terms, like, oh, I'm no Latinx, I don't even know what the hell that is. Like, old school cats, like, want nothing to do with that term. They're like, yo, I'm Chicano.
Well,
like,
and you know, and I appreciate that, because even our people, like, we and some folks that were here, and I just want to shout out Felicia and Tanae. Felicia said when she was younger, it was Chicano. That's what she was taught. And Tanae was definitely agreeing with me around another Black person who was not very fond of that good that term. You know what I mean? So, you know, I just think that it's I just think it's interesting. You know what I'm saying? I just think that is something that what people want to be identified as is just really important. And again, nationally, I hear Hispanic a lot more. In California, I would hear Latinx or whatever the case was. So I really do appreciate you all, you know, helping us out with that.
Yeah, you know, look, I got a small story, and I told David this story, and I don't know if it encapsulates the whole debate over names, but I think it kind of segues into what are some of the issues that we got with one another. So, you know, I was fortunate enough to go to Stanford out here in California. I'm actually here right now. I'm home in San Francisco right now. When I was in college, and I remember, you know, I grew up in El Paso. Both my parents are from Mexico, Sonora y Chihuahua. So, like, I'm a first generation American, and, you know, for all intents and purposes, I identify oftentimes as Mexican American. So I hear about Centro Chicano, right? Already the name there. And I'm like, yo, I'm gonna go and show up and see what I can do, and do the tutoring, see how I can volunteer. What's up, Retta? Say hi to the audience, man. Retta Asfahani, everybody. Basel Leadership Academy.
What's up, people?
How you doing, man?
I can do a dance. You guys good?
We're good, man. Yeah.
Go for a walk.
Cool. We'll see you in a bit. So I show up, and there's, a pretty Chicano looking cat behind the counter. And I walk in, and dude, like, for the minute I walk in, this guy like just clocks me, right? And he's like giving me like the stink eye and shit. And I'm like, I wonder if I got the right place. Dude, I'm like a freshman. I don't know where the hell I am. I could be in the wrong building and shit. So I walk in, and I'm like, is this Centro Chicano? And he says something in the tune of like, you lost, pretty boy? I was like, thanks for the compliment, man. But I asked again, I was like, is this Centro Chicano? And he's like, oh, let me guess. What do you want to do, man? You want to help us brown people out? You want to come in here and you want to save us brown people? Is that what you're up to, man? And I'm like, first off, like, what the fuck kind of hello is that? Like, you're at the reception area, man. Like, normally one would just say hello. Normally one would say what's going on. One would say welcome. And I get this like ridiculous thing. And I'm 18. I'm obviously kind of like taken aback and even a little pissed. And I'm like, okay, again, man, I'm mad. I'm looking to, find out about some opportunities for tutoring or volunteering or whatever it may be. And he's like, yo, we don't want your help. We don't need your help. And finally, I just kind of figured this out. And I was like, Oye, ¿de dónde eres? Translated, yo, where are you from?
Mm-hmm.
And he kind of like looks startled. And I was like, ¿de dónde eres? And he kind of gets a little embarrassed. I was like, otro mexicano que no puede hablar español. Ándale. ¿De dónde eres? ¿Eres de Califas? ¿Eres de East LA? Que no puedes hablar español. All translated, I was like, oh, another Mexican who can't speak Spanish. Where are you from, dude? You from East LA? Like, where are you from? He's like, yeah, I'm from East Los. And I was like, all right, East Los, why don't you do me a favor, bro? Why don't you tell me the symbol of the snake and the eagle on the Mexican flag? Tell me about that story. Tell me about Teotihuacan. Tell me about Tenochtitlan. Tell me about the dream. Tell me about everything. Brother didn't know shit. And, you know, I told David this story, but like, this is our problem, right? Like, I'm 18, I'm all pissed off, we're getting into a fight, but it's like, this is how we start getting into brown on brown issues, is like, who's trying to out Mexican one another? Why are you immediately identifying me as someone who's not Mexican instead of asking questions? And the truth was, it's like, yo, like, I know my history. I know, like, I speak the language.
Right.
And the two of us, instead of coming together, already started that animosity. But that's a good microcosm for why, like, Mexicans get in this beef. And I want to launch it over to David to be like, what has caused so many damn problems between us?
And even as David is going, just want David to be aware of this comment, because we talk back in the comments on this show. Alonzo said, Omar, we need a good reality check and to embrace our culture. Once we accept what our ancestors have gone through, we can accept these terms such as Latin X. The whole floor is yours, brother. Let me actually give you the whole. There you go, B. This is
all right. Yeah, I mean, the first part of that comment relates to what I was going to share, and I think it's really.
And tell me if you need me to put it back up for you.
Okay, no, we're good. I mean, like, can we like distinguish between how we are being labeled based on perhaps our country of origin, right? Or can we actually look past that? Because, you know, every country, you know, a country is like a figment of our imagination, right? It's not a creation of God. A tribe is a creation of God, right? And so how can we get beyond like identifying with like where we may have been from in the last 100 years versus where our people, our collective people, come from in the last 1,000 or 2,000 or 3,000 or 10,000 years, right? So you start to break the walls down between, like, you know, our tribe, our people, our culture versus, like, you know, a country that our people may have passed through that's only been around for a couple of 100 years, right? But it's just, I mean, going back to the original example of Bacon's Rebellion, is just like another way of dividing people. And sometimes people don't have to do anything. We divide ourselves, right? So Omar told me that story, and I was like, yeah, and that's also amazing. It's happening on like the Stanford University campus, right? Which is a whole other thing, in beautiful Palo Alto. To juxtaposition his point, my family, we were in what is now the country that we know as the United States, not America, because everybody's like, oh, we come to America. No, America is 3 big continents, right? We live in the United States. So if you're talking about like critical race theory or whatever it is talking about America, you have to fix that to be the United States. So my family has been here in this country of the United States for before it was even a country, in Texas before 1848, right? The border literally crossed us. And so I have that orientation to where we are. Omar is a first generation, you know, he's comes from an immigrant family. But we actually, you know, I think the curiosity is to find out, like, okay, so how are we actually connected? Because you don't have to dig that deep to find out how you're connected, you know. I think that's my initial response.
But I mean, and I'm just listening to this, right? Because you said something interesting, and even as we talk about history with young people, right? Like the way when you said the border we didn't cross a border, the border crossed us, right? Which is a very I think that's a very sobering statement that I don't know if we actually drive home for people and make them sit with, because, you know, like some people get to say, yo, I'm an immigrant of this country. Like, and I think that people say that with a lot of pride, right? It means a lot if you start somewhere and get your family here, regardless of how people might feel about the United States or what they got to say, or, you know, they go on TV and kind of bash it. But we know that for a lot of non-United States people, that a major life goal is to get to this place. And as a black dude listening to that, it's like, yeah, man, my people were like brought here. Like, you know what I mean? Like, no choice, not wanting to do that, just over in Africa chilling, doing whatever. And then it's like, yo, get on this boat, and went through this treacherous kind of trek to get here with no kind of choice, and history kind of erased in that kind of way. So, you know, I was listening, and I was taking in both the kinship and the drastic difference of how we like got here, you know what I'm saying? And I just feel like if I was born like that, David, I would just be like, no, this is ours. Like, you know what I mean? Like, I would just have more, you know, like, wait, hold on. So I'm just, that might not have made a bunch of sense to a bunch of people, but I'm processing live, like, as I'm hearing and trying to empathize with, you know, just what you're saying. And I want to also make sure we show our people love. Tanae said, don't get me lying, but somebody asked, again, this is why these new terms annoy people in this black community, is because they ain't talked to nobody. They ain't went to no neighborhoods. Like, it's just like the quote unquote smart people that's like, yo, this new term BIPOC is the new thing. And even in our comments, people are working that out right now. Well, what does that actually mean? Right. And then Omar, when you were talking, Felicia just was showing you some love. She said you was preaching, brother. So this is high praise coming from my people. Oh, you know what I'm saying? When they tell you to speak or preach, brother, that mean that you rocking. So I didn't want to throw us off. I think what I wanted to do, just and make sure in this episode, what we were doing was, there are some historic things that has laid a bedrock, and it behooves certain folks, if none of us like each other, it behooves certain folks if we don't want to like bring those things together and kind of want to stay in our own lane and stay with our own people and this, that, and the third. And listen, y'all know how I feel. I have no issue with somebody that's not black putting their culture first and figuring, you know, and learning who they are and figuring out their history. I think that we have to do that as a people. Like, again, I can't go back more than 3 generations of my family, 4 generations. Like, it gets really dicey, man. And to not know where you come from, not know whose you are, you know what I'm saying? That can just be really, really tough. So, you know, I'm just enjoying this, man. I'm enjoying taking it in and having like a different type of show. So
I appreciate that.
I don't know, but let me get y'all's reactions, man. And then I know we got one more question that I'm interested in, but go ahead. Oh,
yo, I wanted to ask a question, and I wanted to maybe start a little bit of shit. This is something that's real in the Latino community. So, Charles, this kind of is a question for you as well, and definitely for David. Somewhere in the mix, the tone of your skin matters.
okay.
So when I mean that in like the Latino community or Latinx community, it's like, yo, like, even in Mexico, the lighter you are, the greater oftentimes the privilege, the social class, the way that you're treated, so on and so forth. There could be, you know, obvious parallels in the United States and stuff. So, you know, I was having this conversation with David, and I was like, yo, this ever happened to you where you're a group of like white people, and then they're just like, yeah, man, and these fucking wetbacks and these spics come over and they take our health care and they take this and they take that. And I'm literally like, get chingados on. Yo, like, and I'm like, yeah, I know that I'm not like, you know, looking like the most emblematic Chicano, but that's the point of being Latino, is that we all have like different looks to us, and we can't make these assumptions. But I'm also like, do you not think I'm at all Mexicano? Because you're talking shit. And then I'll be like, yo, both my parents are from Mexico. And then they'd be like, oh, well, you must be one of the good ones. And well, I wanted to ask these 2 questions. Like, it's A, have you been in this situation? But B, what is it like in in the Black community as well in terms of like color? Do you all disparage?
Oh, absolutely, bro. So first off, whew, let me make sure and say this disclaimer. You got to do this when you Black. I'm sure y'all got to do it too. I do not speak for all Black people. I can't do that. Blah, blah, blah. The disclaimer is out there. But colorism is a huge thing, man. Like, I don't know if you've ever heard of the brown paper bag test. And basically, they would take a brown paper bag and put up against your skin. If you were lighter than the bag, you could pass. If you were not, you got a different type of treatment. And I went to the Dominican Republic, which is actually is a great crossover for our show because it's Afro Latino. But like in the Dominican Republic, I met Black folks that look like me, same color, and they consider themselves white. They speak Spanish. They do not. They will be offended. And the Haitians who happen to be a darker hue are treated very differently. So the resort that I stayed in, all the people with speaking jobs or waiters or waitresses or whatever, or hosts, were all light-skinned Dominicans. And everybody cleaning the pools and cleaning the rooms or whatnot were darker Haitians. And so we have always had an issue of colorism. Spike Lee did a really dope movie about it called School Days. And if you get a chance, you should definitely check it out. And what he did in it, which made it so dope as we're having this conversation, and I would say for anybody, Black or non-Black, actually, especially non-Black, he goes into the politics of both Black Greek life, which is something that a lot of Black folks take very, very seriously. And he goes into he talks about colorism, right? The jigaboos and I mean, it's wild, man. It's so wild, right? And so, yes, colorism was a thing during slavery. The other thing that would happen is if you were a lighter skin, you got to work in the house. You got to serve. You got to be around people. Things like that. And it probably was really. I mean, they raped all the women in general, but like, especially if you were a lighter woman and you were like in the home quarters. And so that's why Malcolm X talks a lot about field Negroes versus house Negroes. And there became this kind of split in Black society. And, it's not something that we talk about. Well, we talk about it, right? But it's something that still happens today. And colorism is a real thing, bro. It's a real wild thing. I've seen it in Latino like folks as well too. Like I've definitely seen it kind of play out. But hopefully that answered. Omar, I don't know if that wasn't clear. Let me know and we can riff. We can stay here.
No, it's straight up. I kind of wanted to hear David's.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's interesting because my even though like I'm not at my darkest right now, I got to get out in the sun. Right. I can get very dark, right? And I love my dark. I love my brown skin. But navigating through this world, not even just your personal life, but your like our education related lives, our work, right? People that we interact with, even like today, in 2021. Colorism is alive and well. Like Omar is going to be treated very differently. As a Latino male compared to, how I'll be treated, on first glance, because he has lighter skin, right? It's like, I mean, I've traveled throughout, Latino America, Europe and I mean, colorism, I've traveled to the panacea of Cuba, right? It's like, it's where everything is perfect. I'm like, look at the people that are like really poor, and then look at the government. Look at what the government looks like. Hello, right? It's even, I mean, it's white, black there, right? And so, it's definitely real. Also, like outside of education, it's like I'm more likely to get pulled over by police for doing nothing wrong, and it happens all the time, right? And so it's just, I mean, it's the tax that we live with, right? And at certain times it can be fucking exhausting. But here we are talking about it.
And the reason I bring it up is because not only do I think it's like a decent segue, but it's this idea of like when we talk about Black and brown coming together and all this rooted in this discussion about Bacon's Rebellion, that like one may be better than the other in the eyes of the aristocracy, in the eyes of the people that are making these decisions. I think this phenomena, if you will, should be thought about because it further perpetuates the problem. So if there are some of us that are being treated one way and treated another way, it then becomes that situation that like Frere talks about, right? So I'll probably talk a lot more about like Frere, and I know David will probably go off on Frere and the pedagogy and all that shit. Like, it's really this idea of like, one, even amongst each other, we subjugate as a result of color. But are we also doing that in a better attempt to essentially disassociate ourselves with our people, with our culture, with our background, because we are essentially saying, as you heard of the Dominican Republic, I'm not Latino, I'm not Latina, I'm not Black, I am white.
Right.
And I want to be part of this dominant culture, which then further exasperates the problem. Because, you know, I've got family members that are literally like, yo, man, these wetbacks, bro, they come over here and they take all our shit, bro. And I'm like, you mean my parents? You mean your grandparents? Like, what the fuck are you talking about, dude? You're like second generation, like Mexican American. What are you talking about? And it's this construct of, am I trying to disassociate myself with my race? But then it gets into the further difficulty of like colonization. How is being colonized by like the Spanish in our case made us feel inferior and make us feel afraid of our indigenous background, which is a load of bullshit, because if you know anything about our indigenous background, it's gorgeous, it's incredible, it's strength, science, intelligence personified. But we've been sold this bill of goods, and it's just kind of what I wanted to like launch into, and I know we'll get us into the last question about like, what the hell is going on in our brains that makes us do this to each other in our own races, and then obviously why we have this fight amongst one another, Black and brown.
Yep. I want to add one quick thing, and then we can move on, because I think this is related to the national conversation around like diversifying our teaching force, right, to better match the children that are enrolled into the schools they're serving. And the way that, you know, we collect demographic data right now in schools is pretty archaic, but like you end up getting these close matches where you have a big district and it's like 40% Latino, Latina, Latinx, but it only might have 10% of its teachers that are, you know, Latino, Latinx, or it might be a close match. I think what we just have been talking about is like the complexity of like, what does that actually mean? Like you could be a Latinx teacher, you know, like me, teaching an immigrant child from Guatemala, right? That is so it's so different, even though we are all like put together and clumped together in these like demographic data sets, right? But our lived experiences are so incredibly different. Not just, you know, around like where we come from, but like socioeconomics, talking about the difference between like our teaching force and the students in our schools, talking about like places like Texas and California, where we know we have deep disconnects. Right. And so I think that's like it's a relevant point that I wanted to like, you know, bring up and like lift up, because it's not just about like what the percentages say. You have to look deeper. And that is you know, you start getting into like professional development, how are people preparing their teachers, you know, starting with basic culturally relevant, culturally affirming curriculum, and then going along the continuum, right? It's complex.
I mean, it's complex, and I think that one of the things that you both were talking about, and what O was talking about, again, the people, when people think of the United States, they like to have these, well, let's have democratic elections. Let's do this, democracy this, democracy this, democracy this.
Mhm.
And that's fine, but we're part of an empire. Like this is an American empire, right? And I think when you get into empire talk, and I talk about this on A Black Hands all the time, like now we can have a clearer conversation because a lot of people are playing checkers on a chessboard. Like it's like, yo, you playing this game that you think you killing it at, and it's a whole other set of rules. Now we just talking about a general democracy. It's very different than talking about like an actual empire. So whether it's the Ming Dynasty, the British Empire, or the United States, part of this is indoctrination. So even when pilgrims took over and started to slaughter like Native folks, the Native folks is like, yo, if you want to live and be a part of this, you need to get out of that garb and put on a suit or put on a dress. And this is how we talk, right? This is a part of our education system. If we look at our education now, see, y'all thought we wasn't 3 educators. We was gonna wrap education in here, y'all. This is what we do. You think about education now, right? There's a reason why we're not teaching people how to save money, that we're not teaching people how to invest, that we're not teaching people how to be bosses, right? Like part of our public education system is to create workers, to maintain a system and an empire. And you need, if you do read anything around how things were made here, I'm gonna go to Blacks in the South, which is an amazing book, but I'm sure there are books talking about Latino culture as well that will highlight this stuff. The way that dynasties maintain themselves is by having very, very, very cheap labor. Okay, like this is why America was able to grow. And let me not say America, the United States, right? And places around the Americas and in England, they were able to grow so quickly because they had slavery. Like they had the freest of free labor. It is why, like, we can keep talking about border issues all this all day or whatever, right? But I go to Stockton. I used to live in Stockton. I know who was out there picking fruit. You know what I'm saying? And, so I think that when we start having these different conversations, like, it's just tough for me, y'all, when we be talking and people are talking like about this purity of like democracy and all this stuff. And I'm like, yeah, that's cool. Are we talking about India that got its own caste system and issues? Or if we talking about the United States, though, we got to really delve into like empire talk and just what that means. Oh, there's a reason the curriculum hasn't changed. There's a reason that all these white folks are coming out right now and talking about we hate CRT. We're not going that route. We're not doing that. And it's like, it's become this nebulous conversation. But really what people are saying is, no, we don't need to teach the truth. What you talking about? You tripping. Either you love America or you don't. And I think that goes into, it's not just in brown culture either, though, right? Where it's like brown folks that are naturalized here, that are now citizens, that's looking back at the folks from their country and being like, oh, nah, we need you to get the fuck out of here, right? Like these my white people. And there are black folks that happens with black folks too. You know what I'm saying? Like when you start hearing black people talk about the talented 10 and they start getting into those kind of conversations, right? Yeah, it's a whole bunch of conversations that happen in our community around who's really for this community. It's crazy. And I know this is a long-winded answer, but I was with Chairman Fred Hampton Jr., the son of Fred Hampton, like less than a month ago, and we were doing a show from his house. And he said, Charles, like, I need you to understand this. Not all black people wanted slavery to end. Some just wanted to be able to hold a whip. So when you think about that, right, just to answer and double back to your question, Omar, and my very long-winded way of answering it, I think that we're very similar in kind of how that plays out, even though the starting points are different. But I don't know. What was y'all's thoughts on that? I know we coming up on the hour, but I think we getting deep into a part that's really important.
You want to jump in, David? Are you on mute? I get very I get wrapped up in my own head about this because it goes back to what you just said about like the book on Kansas, right? Like, why are people doing things that may not be working in their own self-interest? Why are people perpetuating a status quo that is not going to be ultimately in their better interest, right? And it kind of goes back into this, like, again, like Frere and the, the pedagogy of the oppressed and the effects of colonization. And like, those are very fancy ways of saying, like, yo, when you're colonized, when you have a group of Spanish people come in and do all the things that they did to the indigenous people, and then basically create a system of some are better than others, essentially classified on skin color. Oh, you're lighter, so you're better. So you get to do this, which from what I heard from you, Charles, was had its parallels in like the Black community. What you've got is a system of people that are reaping some rewards from this inequity. And they're saying to themselves, well, I'd rather have this than nothing. Because if I band together with these other folks, if I band together with these indigenous folks, it all goes back to Bacon's Rebellion, then I lose everything.
Mm-hmm.
So I'd rather try to get these scraps off of the table. And in doing so, not only align myself with like white dominant culture, but disparage, in this case, like Latinx culture, Chicano culture. Like, yeah, I'm going to do that. I'm going to do that because it's better for me. Because oftentimes, like, most time, people work out of their own self-interest. And this is, again, going into the theme of like, why can Black and brown not get along? What's wrong with us? What's going on with like brown people in general? They can't get along with each other and shit. It's because in working in your own self-interest, you're going to consistently have, as you so eloquently put it, the people who just want to carry the whip. And this is the most fucked up about that. It's not just that they carry the whip, they take some ludicrous satisfaction in subjugating other people from their own race. And saying, yeah, motherfucker, I'm at this level and you're here, and that makes me feel much better about my station in life than when you're at. And it's the psychology of, look at me, white dominant class. You see, I'm doing really well. Like, praise me, reward me. You see, I'm chastising my own people. I'm punishing my own people, because they'd rather beg for the scraps of the dominant culture than create the gorgeous bounty that could happen if we all cooperated against one another. As my mom always said, Mexicanos, niño, she would tell me this in Spanish, like Mexicano, Americanos, they're like crabs in a barrel. I'm sure David's heard this before. One crab tries to get up out of the barrel and the other one grabs.
Oh, we use that saying too, brother. That's a Black folks say that all the time. Crabs in a bucket, what we say.
Yeah.
But yeah,
crabs in the bucket, crabs in the barrel, because ultimately it's what you said when you were talking about like chess and checkers. They're in the bucket playing checkers, thinking that they're going to get themselves out of this bucket. And meanwhile, the game is chess, and it's already bent to like put you into that position in the first place so that you're grabbing and pull each other down so that they don't have to worry about your collective effort. And I think that is really the crux of why we have so many issues, because it's bent on this like it's not irrational. To me it is, but like this psychology of, yeah, it's better to fight and get the little bit than it is to band together and get the lot of it. Because when has that ever worked out for us when we got together and fought for the lot of it?
Man, go ahead, David. I know we coming up on that time, but just in this piece, David, I think just in what we're talking about, and we brought that academic aspect into it, like, what do you want, like, the Black folks and the brown folks that's watching this, that got kids in our system, that's trying to make it happen, make it work or whatever, just based off what we've been talking about so far, which, I mean, you can respond to Omar too, but just curious as you've been listening.
Yeah, I think, there's two ways of looking at this. Is like what's happening in reality right now for Black and brown children, across this country, the United States of America, regarding like schools, right? And we know we probably have like the best data that's coming out of like public schools. And what we know, especially when you like cross Black and brown and like socioeconomic indicators together, there really isn't a place in this country where our children are being served, right? And that's everything from like early literacy, that first, second, third grade, literacy piece, to all the stuff that happens in between, and the over identification and special education programming, everything in between, like our how our kids showing up to school, looking at chronic absenteeism, looking at discipline suspension rates, looking at expulsion rates, and then on the other end, looking at graduation rates. And then even within graduation rates, Charles, something that you've done here in Oakland is to like unpack that even further, to look at what kids are actually graduating with the right curriculum to be able to attend one of our prestigious like state-run universities, right? The ACT data. And so I think that's still the place for me to find common ground between Black and brown people. When we get down to it, we know, there's a lot that we have in common. We've looked at that. We've talked about some of that. We'll continue to talk about it. But we also know in common we have like, pretty abysmal, poor academic indicators for Black and brown children. And we know what those lead into after high school. Black and brown, undereducated, not to be dramatic, but life can be cruel, brutish, and short, right? To quote Thomas Hobbes. We're talking about low-income jobs. We're talking about early engagement in the criminal justice system, school to prison pipeline, mental health issues, homelessness, all those things, right? So in my mind, that's where I go. Yeah.
Got it. I mean, and fellas, well, I think we just been building really well with each other. And I actually don't think we should stop after 3 shows. I think, and I don't know if you've heard about this, Omar, now that you're out here in the Bay just for, on the way to go do some other stuff, but there's a refinery burning, right? In Richmond. And I always drive by the Chevron refineries and the sugar factories and all that stuff. And it's like just black smoke. And you know who lives in Richmond? Black people and brown people. There's a lot of them, and it's a lot of folks, and it's on fire right now. I think they just got the fire under control. But this is what I'm talking about. I remember being an undergrad, and there was a place in the South in Louisiana called Cancer Alley, and Richmond has gotten a tag like that. Richmond is so polluted that if you were a kid that grew up in that area during a certain time period, like they get checks because of how polluted it is, and it's just black and brown people that are there. And I think that's just a good place as we've been building this. And I just want to appreciate you, brothers, because I learned a lot today. And I think, when you get to exchange culture and like learn and see how much is similar, right? Here's what we share. It's black and brown kids right now that's playing in black smoke, that's gonna have to reap these benefits, right? Like it has always been like this. And I think as we continue to move on, I think we bring in more things that's happening, but we talk about what does that look like for us to come together around that stuff? How do we do it? Or what should be happening, right? And I mean, I think it's some tough areas that we need to go through. I also think that it'll be dope if we got an Afro-Latina on here to just really talk about even what that means, because what I've been seeing is that some of them feel a sense of rejection from multiple cultures at the same time, right? Like, oh, you ain't brown enough, and you ain't black enough, and you this and you that, and all that stuff. Versus who's white and who's not. I mean, it's so much stuff to unpack. So, fellas, let's just roll into final thoughts. And why don't you start us with just what's on your mind and where you like to see things go. I'm gonna chime in. I'm gonna let David take us home.
I love it. Yeah, man. It's funny you mentioned that, because like one of the things, and I could talk about it during another podcast in greater length, is there's this like weird question of like why Mexican Americans love Morrissey. So like David and I were talking about it on a phone call, and he's like, oh shit, dude, like, yeah, how come? Why is that, man? And my buddy Josh Peters and I, he's half Mexican. He lives in LA. We talk about that incessantly. And I think you just brought it up because I'd love to have someone that's, Afro-Latina on the show, because when you're in this very odd situation where you are of Mexican ancestry and you're in the United States and neither culture really accepts you. Like, I'm not Mexican enough to be Mexicano, like voy en México y me llaman el gabacho, me llaman el gringo, el Yankee. In Argentina, I was called Yankee Puto. That was awesome. Thanks, Argentina. Shout out to you guys. But then in the United States, I'm obviously not the dominant culture. So you're just kind of lost in this abyss where no one's really accepting of you and you can't go anywhere and you're kind of locked. And, Morrissey, being Irish American, sings songs about that sense of being lost and that dying for a home but can't find it. It's just my short thesis on why Mexicans love Morrissey. But look, this gets into just kind of my quick final thought. We talk about education, and I think, dude, this is education. Discussion of topics with one another is educational. It doesn't just have to happen in school. I think that the solution oftentimes comes from just even the conversations. Now, I'm an educator, so I think that one of the greatest solutions is, in fact, having these discussions in schools with one another, very bold-faced, because, to kind of wrap things up, heard a great quote from one of my favorite authors, James Baldwin. Y'all know him very well. Like, the fantasy is much more bearable than the reality. What a perfect way to discuss how the veil of fantasy that we use in history books, that we use in the United States to cover up racism, to cover up the institutionalized racism that's plagued our country for centuries, is to just, it's so much easier when you don't believe it's there. It's so much more bearable. Like, we've overcome it. Like, we elected Obama. Racism is over. And I think for me, the solution for Black and Brown coming together isn't just obviously like first getting together, because the de facto segregation that we have in our communities is just awful. Like, we self-segregate ourselves from each other, and already that's a problem. And it's not so much that it's like, we need everybody in the same schools together. It's just like, we need to start hanging out with one another a hell of a lot more. That's a start. And then having these discussions in school of unveiling the real history and no longer fearing the truth behind it, and unlocking the reality, so that it's not the fantasy is more bearable than the reality. It's that in these doses, the reality starts to set in, because, to quote Baldwin again, like, there are people who love America and there are people who love the United States for what it could be. And I'm on the other end saying, I know the potential of where we could be. And my hope and my love is consistently in a future tense of what this country could be. But we have to bear the harsh realities together in order to get there.
That's what's up, man. I'm gonna go quickly.
Wow.
Because I think David. Yeah.
What are we gonna do now?
That's that's hard to follow. So David, that's why David, you're gonna be the one that closes us out.
I'm so esoteric. I'm sitting here eating grapes and drinking water.
I know. I was like, I love that. Like, you don't wait until you're not talking to eat your grape. You wait until you get the spotlight. I love that. I was like, well, thanks, Omar. Appreciate it.
I was so hungry, man.
Producer note. He didn't take a bite while neither one of us was talking. He just waited till he was talking. Wait, got you. I'm so grateful to everybody that tuned in. I love building new things from scratch. And I love that we are feeling our way around this, right? To kind of build out the type of show that we want to have. And I think that, there's so many different perspectives out there. Like, I love what we do on A Black Hands. I love the show that we launched yesterday around Black literacy and liberation. And I love this because, one, I like doing this stuff with my friends. And two, I learn on all these different platforms. So thank you to everybody that's here. Keep sharing, keep coming, and give us some suggestions on things you want us to talk about. I want to just keep doing work across the country. I'm working on this report right now that's looking at Black kids that have Black school leaders and just the impacts that that's having on them from a youth perspective. And I want to do that in the brown community. And I want to make sure I'm inviting my brothers David and Omar to be part of that, because I think that there's going to be some trends across racial groups that we need to be highlighting. And I think that people don't really sing these praises and talk about it because they're scared to make a ruckus. They're scared to say, yeah, it's really important for brown kids to be in schools with brown leadership and black kids to be in schools with black leadership. That doesn't mean that they can't benefit from other things. Right. But even in the findings, I'm reading things, you guys, where kids are saying, this is the first time, like, oh, I love that this leader is breaking stereotypes. Like when you got a 7th grader talking about needing to break stereotypes and what it feels like to see somebody in power. And I think that's why we do this show. I think that people would prefer to see us fighting and doing, you know, they like seeing us angry, right? Like if you're in Oakland, you can see me and David angry all the time, like, because we fighting for kids. It just is what it is, right? And I think that this show is going to give us an opportunity to actually talk things out in a different type of way. And I just respect authentic conversation. I've had so many conversations with both Omar and David. Omar on our last show and David just from doing work. And I just feel like these cats is brilliant. And there's just a wisdom that comes with it that I benefit from. And so we're going to figure out the best ways to continue to pull that out of people and pull that out of each other, man. But I just wanted to say publicly, just thank you both for going on this journey. And I want to keep it going. I think that there's a lot of potential, not just for the show, but the work that we can do through the show and then come back and report to people. So I left David for last because he's much wiser than me. And O said some really deep stuff. And I knew I wasn't going to say anything very deep. So David, no pressure at all. Just end the show as great as possible and make sure that we have 1 million people watching next time. It's only you can do it, David. So no pressure though, buddy. Go ahead. Take us out.
All right. Thank you. Thank you for that lead up, Charles. Appreciate that. I'll get you back.
Let me give you the screen by yourself as you do it, because you got this.
Yeah, I mean, I think I think how we started the show talking about like a historical event, right? And so my brain always goes back to there's this whole world of like, we could talk about race and power and privilege. There's the whole world of policy. And then there's like the reality that our kids are experiencing both in their homes and in schools, right? And we all grow up with actually, I'm going to back up. We don't all grow up the same way. Some of us we grow up with different ways that our families and our cultures came to being. And sometimes some of us have to go back and like learn different things, relearn things within schools. What we're talking about here on the show, is generally related to like curriculum, and not to be like boring or dry about it. But going back to Bacon's Rebellion, going back and taking an honest look at how World War I, World War II, Korean War, Vietnam, Black and brown soldiers were treated, both overseas and when they came back to the United States, looking at all kinds of different historical events, right, through a lens of race and power. And I've not really gotten engaged in the whole like critical race theory debates that are happening right now, but I hope it's very clear that both Omar and I and Charles, Dr. Cole, understand the importance of teaching about like historical events through that critical lens, because that's how I think two things. That's how we, as whoever we are, can like establish ourselves in our power, in our community, in our footing. And then that's how we can also look across to say like, oh, well, we have this in common with our Asian American brothers and sisters, our African American brothers and sisters, our Native American brothers and sisters. You can't do that unless you have that ground, strong footing of understanding your own story well, and that you're grounded in it. So I think going forward, maybe in the next episode or two, we can get a little more deeper in the woods around like what's actually happening in our schools. But I also really appreciate the larger umbrella talk.
I appreciate you, man. I think you hit it on the head. And I think also, man, it's just an opportunity for us to really get to know each other a bit better and like set the stage. Let me get down here because I look so much bigger than David when I'm up there next to him. I'm like, did David get smaller and smaller in between two ferns?
It's a big ass plants that he's got, man.
I know, but listen, man, David look like he should be in Hawaii right now, man. So I'm not mad at it, bro. We gonna do some shows from Hawaii. Let's just bring the whole squad and let's do that, man. But this has been great, and I want, I like this part. Like I'm on polished shows, right? I'm on shows that like we got the groove and everything. I like this. I like building something from scratch with scrappy people. And learning along the way. So I appreciate y'all. For everybody watching, thank you so much. Please continue to comment. Please continue to share. We'll be back next week at the exact same time, 3 p.m. Pacific, 6 p.m. Eastern. And if you have thoughts, leave them in the comments and let us know. We'll continue to share your thoughts and share your comments. We grow these together. And so we talk back to our comments and the people that watch, and we're just really grateful. Humbly for David, Omar, and myself, this has been Common Grounds of Self-Determination, and we'll see you next week. Peace.
Thanks, everybody.